What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review of Dragon Age 2. So just to get a few things out of the way straight off the bat, originally I did a review after 100% for Inquisition, and I mentioned that I hadn't played Origins or 2. So naturally people were like, oh, you should totally play Origins and the other one. Origins more so than 2, but that said, I've played all of these games in the weirdest possible order, starting with Inquisition, then going to Origins, and then playing 2. Also, typically speaking, I like to review games after I 100% them. However, Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Origins, that's not really possible. I mean, you can 100% them in my opinion. However, there's no way for me to prove that because with most of my reviews after 100%, I have links to my Steam profile and everything else so people can kind of see that. It's all public. But there's no way for me to publicly verify a review after 100% for Dragon Age 2, and as such, this is just a review, really. Kind of retrospective-y, but the word retrospective is a bit loaded on YouTube, and has expectations of a certain kind of content associated with it, so I hesitate to actually use that word. Another thing that is important to know about Dragon Age 2 is that it had a very short dev time. Dragon Age Origins released in 2009, Dragon Age 2 released in 2011, and they didn't even start on Dragon Age 2 until they were wrapping up production on the Awakening expansion to Dragon Age Origins. This was a deadline that was imposed by EA, which is really unfortunate. So I did want to say that while I am going to knock certain parts of this game, I think that bit of information is important to paint a clear picture of why this game is the way that it is. With that said, Dragon Age 2 is a sequel to Dragon Age Origins, of course, and in it we play either Garrett or Marion Hawke, or at least those are the default characters. You can, of course, name and change the appearance of said protagonist, but Garrett and Marion Hawke, either the female or male version of Hawke, are kind of the default NPC, shall you say, because at the end of the day, you're going to play somebody with the last name Hawke, period. And you and your family are a refugee group from the village of Lothering during the Blight that happens in the first game. In the initial opening area of Dragon Age Origins, Lothering is about to fall to the Blight, so our family in Dragon Age 2 is running from that, and with some help from Flemeth, Morrigan's mother, they manage to escape to Kirkwall, which is a city across the sea in the Free Marches, so not in Ferelden. And throughout the game, we see the rise of your version of Hawke, how they rise from just a, refugee from a foreign land during a blight into a champion of the city during a time of rising political tensions, especially with the Templar and mages. Now, this entire story is done with a bit of a framing device, by which I mean that we see a seeker, which of course turns out to be Cassandra from Inquisition, interrogating the dwarf, Varric, who is actually telling us the story. So with our introduction and story setup out of the way, the Dragon Age series is really defined by the choices you make, and as such, you can import a save from Dragon Age Origins that will then take your decisions from that game and carry them over into Dragon Age 2, which will, of course, affect certain aspects of the game. And I did, of course, have a save from Origins that I did exactly this with. But let's talk about character creation a little bit. As I already mentioned, you can choose to either be a male or female Hawke. You choose a class, either a rogue, warrior, or a mage. And then you can also change your character's appearance. They do kind of give you that default Hawke appearance that you'll kind of see everywhere. And in terms of classes, this is, of course, important because this is going to affect a couple things. The skills you have access to, the gear you're able to equip, some of it as a required class. And moreover, it will also affect some of the dialogue in-game as well. Because this game is largely about the rising tensions between the mages and the Templar of the universe, I chose to play as a mage because I thought that would be the most fun. Now that said, you're also making another important decision with your class choice. Because if you play as a rogue or a warrior, your brother Carver will die in the opening scenes. However, if you play a mage, your sister Bethany will die in the opening scenes, which already kind of changes the game quite a bit by affecting an entire companion that you'll get one way or the other. Carver is a two-handed warrior, whereas Bethany is also a mage. Now, outside of character creation, we also have the difficulty of the game. This is going to affect similar things to Inquisition, actually, which is enemies being immune to certain damage types, such as elemental damage that would be relevant. So if you're attacking a rage demon, which is on fire damage then doesn't do anything to it. It can also turn friendly fire on. And on the harder difficulties, the game does have a bit more of a tactical feel. That is to say, tactics are important, positioning is important, things like that. However, the normal mode of the game is honestly more of a hack and slash than anything else. And coming from Origins, that's a very big difference because Origins was all about tactical combat, whereas the base of Dragon Age 2 is much more action-oriented. So that's something important to keep in mind with difficulty. But with that out of the way, let's talk world building. The game, it's important to note, actually takes place over about 10 years or so. Remember, Varric is telling us the story, so the time will skip as you're playing through the game. And as such, you will handle certain political situations and problems that the city might have over the course of those years. And we can kind of see Hawke's position in the city, as well as the position of our companions, which we'll talk about later, also change throughout the course of the story, which was honestly a pretty good touch. I liked that. Now, the world building itself is, of course, comprised of the Dragon Age lore. And I have to say, Dragon Age has some of my favorite lore in video games. In fact, coming from Dragon Age Inquisition and then actually reviewing Dragon Age Origins before this, one of the things I noted about Dragon Age Origins is that I was impressed by how complete the lore already was at that stage. You can tell that they really built the world and then started making the games. So while the lore of the world still feels really good, it is, unfortunately, bogged down by the fact that you are just in one city. You just kind of see yourself fast traveling from location to location across the map, or the world map that you get given, which is really just a day and night version of the city of Kirkwall, as well as a couple areas outside of the city. Now, these areas that you're in also aren't particularly large. Every one of these locations is pretty small, and as such, you're going to be fast traveling to different locations constantly, and that comes with a lot of loading screens. And while modern hardware does certainly help out with that situation, it doesn't change the fact that you're going to be hitting a lot of loading screens playing this game. And, unfortunately, and this is truthfully probably the worst part of the game for me, is that the game reuses assets left and right. Now again, this game had a very short development time, so I do understand why they did this, but from a purely player standpoint, it's not good. So basically every cave or ambush location or secret hideout you walk into is one of like the same 5 maps. What they might do is change the location you enter it at, or potentially block off certain routes with like a blocked door. However, the map itself is the same, and this becomes very apparent after your first few hours with the game. And while I did have a lot of fun engaging in the Dragon Age world, seeing the kind of newer version of the Qunari, because in Dragon Age Origins, one of the few things that didn't really seem as fleshed out were the Qunari, whereas in this game, they kind of come into their own and are basically what I was more familiar with in Inquisition. So seeing that transition was cool. Actually having aspects of the Qun properly explained, if you will, in the course of a game was also really nice. I liked that. I liked seeing your position change as you traversed the game and, time was passing. I thought a lot of that was cool. However, all of that is really bogged down by the constant reuse of assets and the fast traveling back and forth, which makes a lot of the game feel like more of a chore than anything else. And that is further exacerbated by a problem that we're going to talk about in the combat section, which is up next, but we will be circling back to that part, by the way. Now, I did want to mention this in the world building section as well, but playing Dragon Age Inquisition first, I knew that at least part of Dragon Age 2 involved red lyrium, because you are explicitly told this in Inquisition, which I played first. So I was a little surprised to play through Dragon Age 2, and red lyrium almost be non-existent. Now, it is very important at the end of the game, and there is a reveal that I don't want to ruin that actually explains quite a bit about the story. But as someone going into this expecting red lyrium to be more of a presence, and while you do actually see it during a certain part of the earlier game, and on Varric's personal quest, that's it. I was kind of waiting at some point for the red lyrium to become a thing, and then it doesn't really pop up again until the very end of the game. Then it was like, yeah, that makes a lot more sense now. So I did kind of want to mention that in the world building section. And then last but not least for world building, and mostly just because I didn't know where else to put this, this is clearly where they made the switch to the dialogue wheel in the Dragon Age games. So Dragon Age Origins uses your classic list of text responses that you then pick from. Whereas Dragon Age 2 made the switch to BioWare's infamous dialogue wheel. Now this game will point out whether or not you're being just honest or having a humorous response or an aggressive response. There's also special interactions that you can see based on your class and things. Now the problem that I personally have with the dialogue wheel is that you never know exactly what you're going to say. With the more text-based counterparts, for starters, it's easier to make dialogue feel more natural because, you see exactly what you're going to say. The dialogue wheel, you just see an approximation of what your character is going to say, and sometimes that doesn't always line up. Now, I will give Dragon Age 2 a little bit of credit. Most of the responses here are actually on par with what you would assume you're picking. So if you pick a humorous option, usually that's actually pretty good dialogue. So in this particular iteration, I didn't really run into the problems that this system tends to have, but worth pointing out that this clearly is where they made that switch, which kind of has the result of making dialogue feel a little more simplistic in some cases, even if the previous system was more of an illusion of depth as opposed to actual depth in some cases. So now let's talk combat. As I already mentioned, they cut a lot of the more tactical stuff for a more action-oriented system. In fact, we see most of the skills you could use from Origins completely done away with. There's no intimidate or persuasion or anything. In fact, the only skill that really seems to have held over was the lockpick skill for the rogues, who have to just now raise their cunning stat to use it. There's no abilities associated that they have to pick out with it. But most of the skill system seems to have just been scrapped entirely. That said, attributes are still a thing. You will still be picking things like strength, cunning, dexterity, magic, etc., and all of these are relevant to your appropriate class. Most of these attributes are pretty straightforward. All of them will do something for everyone, however each class has more important stats. For instance, mages obviously want magic because that's where their damage comes from. Warriors want strength because that's where their damage comes from, etc. Now each time you level up, you're going to get 3 attribute points to spend on the attributes of your choice, as well as an ability point to spend. Now the abilities uses more of an ability tree system that we see in Inquisition, however a bit more expansive. So depending on your class, exactly what trees you have access to change, of course. Mages get access to various kinds of magic with abilities to choose from. Rogues get things like archery and dual wielding, whereas warriors get two-handed or sword and shield or defender stuff. And then to take it one step further, each individual companion actually gets their own unique ability tree, which makes playing that particular character genuinely feel unique, which I liked a lot. I actually wish they had kept that in Inquisition, because I think that would have really helped some of those companions you get really differentiate themselves. Now, in addition to this, at level 7 and at level 14, you will get a specialization point. This is going to allow you to pick a specialization, which is a separate ability tree that you get a little later, at 7 and 14. Now, this is basically just more abilities for you to use, but it tends to do more specialized stuff. For instance, the mage gets a healer one, as well as a force magic one. Warriors can be a Templar, for instance, and it just kind of gives you more abilities to play and mess around with. Now, in addition to this, the tactics system is still in place from Origins. This is similar to a few other systems, such as the Gambit system from Final Fantasy XII, which is what I'm personally more familiar with it as. But basically, you can set up your companion's AI, so to speak, to where when certain things happen, they will react in a certain way. Such as when there's a certain amount of enemies near them, they'll use this ability, that kind of thing. This keeps you from having to micromanage every one of your party members at every moment. And as I previously mentioned in the difficulty section, higher difficulties have a bit more of a tactical feel where this is necessary. On normal, you can honestly just hack and slash your way through basically everything, kind of regardless. Last but not least, for the combat section of this video. The approach to encounter design in Dragon Age 2 seems to have just been throw as many enemies at them as possible. So while you're exploring the city or outside of the city in the couple of areas there, you'll often encounter enemies, as you might imagine. What I was not expecting was the sometimes 6 waves worth of enemies in just a random ambush. So sometimes you'll be walking, you'll get attacked by a few enemies. More enemies will just spawn into the encounter as you're fighting it. Literally you can see them jumping in from roofs, or in some cases literally just spawning in. And I kid you not, there will be encounters with, I counted, literally 6 waves worth of enemies just continuing to join the fight. And while I get they were going for a more action-oriented experience, there gets a point where this is just incredibly tedious. Especially when you're playing on a difficulty where it's not a matter of if I win this fight, but win. To where really all you've done is drag this encounter out for no reason, then simply throwing enemies at me. And honestly, I didn't enjoy that at all. Next up, we have the companion section. So companions are one of those things when I approach them in reviews, I tend to try not to play any favorites, so to speak. So this is one of those things that is just very subjective. And my opinions about companions tend to be wildly different than my viewers' opinions about companions. And as such, it is hands down probably the most contentious thing I cover, when it comes to preferences with companions. So in terms of my reviews, what I look for with companions is really, do they go through any amount of growth? Because whether or not I like a companion personally, someone out there will probably like that companion. So what I try to judge is basically, are any of these people going through a story? Do they have an arc? Is there character progression? That's the kind of thing I look for a review. Also, me personally, I don't care about romances in video games. I just don't. It has no appeal to me. But I am fully aware that a lot of people play these games for the romances. So as such, the romances are a possibility with the companions Isabella, Meryl, Anders, Fenris, and the DLC companion Sebastian, which we'll talk more about in the DLC section. Now, all of these romances are available to either male or female Hawk, with the exception of Sebastian. Sebastian can only be romanced by female Hawk. Now, all that said, I was happy to see that the companions in Dragon Age 2 did honestly get quite a bit to them. In terms of a shorter game, like the entirety of Dragon Age 2 is going to run you maybe 20-30 hours, DLC included, and a big portion of that is all of the companions. Now, I'm not going to go over every single companion individually, just because we'd be here all day, and plus exactly which companions you have access to can, of course, change. But in general, all of them were really fleshed out. You get to see these characters grow as time progresses in the story. For instance, one of your first companions, Aveline, you actually see her go from a member of the Guard to the captain of the Guard. You see her get married even. And I just thought it was a really cool touch to see those kinds of things progress as the story progresses. Now, each individual companion has a rivalry or a friends meter. Now, they won't necessarily leave you depending on, rivalry versus friendship. However, it will affect their interactions, of course. For instance, whether or not a companion helps you at a certain point in the game really depends on how much they are down one of those paths, which adds some fun variation to your interactions with the companions as well. A really good example of this is that one of the more interesting companions to me was Fenris, a former slave to the Tevinter Imperium, which is a bunch of mages. So me being a mage, Fenris and I naturally had a bit of a rough back and forth a lot of the time. Even though I personally thought the guy was cool, my character was a mage, and they just didn't gel a lot of the times. In addition to this, your actions throughout the game, taking certain companions with you at certain moments, will lead to different outcomes, which the game doesn't really tell you. You just have to either know or figure it out. These companions can die. You can do things that will directly affect their death. So just a lot of cool stuff going on with the companions. Typical BioWare stuff. They usually do companions very well. And in terms of the broad cast of companions, I will say that I genuinely enjoyed companions in this game across the board more than both of the other Dragon Age games. While there are individual companions I like more in each of those games, broad picture, I liked this group of companions much more, and seeing them across different points of their lives over the years was just really cool. Alright, so let's talk DLC. Much like Dragon Age Origins, there is a ton of DLC for this game. However, most of it is things like items and little extras that you can get. There are 3 major content DLCs, which is what we're going to cover in this section. Now, the first up is the DLC that adds the DLC companion, Sebastian, to your team. Or at least available to your team, I should say. Sebastian himself is a member of the Chantry, which is like the religious organization of this world. He is an archer with a past. You kind of get to explore that past, help him make decisions, and he can just join your team as a useful member of it. His arc, if you will, kind of relates to the main story a little bit, which I thought was nice. And while his presence is certainly welcome, it doesn't add too much to the experience in general unless you just really like Sebastian. Now, the other 2 are a bit stranger, but one of them in particular I thought was really weird, and that is Mark of the Assassin. So from a content perspective, what Mark of the Assassin really does is gives you a chance to see some more of the lore of the Qun and the Qunari, and learn that they encompass more than just the literal race of Qunari, but also other races that have decided to embrace the Qun, which is their moral, almost religious code that they follow. So the DLC really explores some aspects of that. Offers a couple different types of gameplay where you can, for instance, engage in a bit of a stealth mission. And both of these DLCs actually have big cinematic, mechanically important boss fights. That is to say, the boss fights at the end of these DLCs actually have mechanics to them rather than just a hack and slash like I mentioned earlier. So that was pretty cool. But the weird thing about Mark of the Assassin is that you get a temporary companion, if you will, throughout it named Talus. So I knew going into this that Talus was voiced by Felicia Day. What I did not realize is that Talus just was Felicia Day. They literally used her face for this. And it just felt really weird. Yeah, I don't know. The voice acting itself didn't bother me. I just wasn't expecting them to just randomly insert said celebrity into a DLC. I mean, it's kind of whatever. I don't have a problem with Felicia Day or anything she does. I just thought it was a weird choice for this particular game. Kind of seemed out of the blue, I guess. But that brings us to the other DLC, Legacy. So in this, we see us investigating a group of the Karta, which are like criminal dwarves, that are focusing on Hawk and his family specifically. Now, as we investigate, we learn of someone called Corypheus controlling these people, and Corypheus is, of course, the antagonist of Dragon Age Inquisition, which Hawk kind of unknowingly set free because you fight him at the end of this DLC. This DLC is basically just to set up some of the events in Dragon Age Inquisition and show off the antagonist early, again, Corypheus. And overall, pretty cool DLC. You get a little bit more background on Hawk's father, who was actually a mage named Malcolm, who was involved in some dealings with the Grey Wardens as well, so they kind of give you a little bit of family history, shall you say. That's why the DLC is called Legacy, but the main focus is really Corypheus and setting up Inquisition. Now let's talk positives, negatives, and end in a conclusion here. So, positives, right off the bat, Dragon Age. I just love the lore of this universe, and while some aspects of this game are definitely subpar, the lore of Dragon Age remains really cool, and I enjoy it a great deal. In addition to that, again, the companions and seeing them kind of grow and change throughout the story, which takes place over so much time, was really cool. I really liked seeing the tensions between the mages and the Templar kind of growing and then leading up to the events of Inquisition, where they are openly at war with each other at the beginning of the game. So seeing that kind of filled in was really cool. I like the ability tree system of the combat, but the action focus left a lot to be desired, and you can start seeing them kind of reel that action focus in a little bit in Inquisition, where we get that tactical camera and things back, and a bit more focus on tactics, even on normal, although that said, Inquisition is still much more action focused than Origins, absolutely. Now that said, negatives. So again, traveling around Kirkwall, while not necessarily bad, kind of makes for this weird disjointed narrative where you're constantly retreading old ground. Every map you enter is just the same map basically, which gets old pretty quick. The combat encounters seem designed around just throwing bodies at your character, which gets old pretty quick as well. So to offer a conclusion, Dragon Age 2 is a weird game, especially in comparison to the other two entries. Both Inquisition and Origins are these really long RPGs, whereas Dragon Age 2 is like this weird story experience that's like under 20 hours if you wanted to rush it. Now that said, the game itself is, like the base game, is available for $20 on Steam. The DLC, all of it together, is $25. You can buy a bundle of the game and the DLC together for $30. But even that seems a little expensive for today, actually. Like, if it's on sale, I would recommend maybe playing it if you're really into Dragon Age. Like, I don't regret my experience with this by any means, but it's hard to recommend this game unless you're just really into Dragon Age and kind of want to see this story. But because of the way this game is structured, while it's not a bad game or anything, you could honestly save yourself a lot of time and just watch like a plot summary on YouTube or something, and probably be just as well off. And while, again, I don't think Dragon Age 2 is a bad game by any means, I do understand while, especially with a game like this following Origins, which was this really hardcore RPG, to then follow it up with this game, I can see why this game had a bit of a weird reception, frankly. I can see why people consider it the worst of the Dragon Age games, honestly. So, there you go, guys. There is my review of Dragon Age 2, completing the entire series finally. I will potentially make another video kind of discussing some of my broad takeaways from the series. Outside of that, we are done here. Thank you so much for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.